County Commissioners meeting, February 4th, 2020.
Test, 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 test. Test, test, test.
It is. Good morning, everybody. It is 9 a.m., and we're here for a regular Tuesday morning meeting. We have all three commissioners, and rise and join you with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First item on the agenda is approval of minutes for January 14th. There's no additional changes or corrections. I'll sign them as presented.
Looks good to me.
No change.
All right. Then we'll go on to Carly. You have discussion for us?
Good morning. So today is an opportunity to have a discussion about the Salary Commission. Recall on January 7th, the board had discussed the possibility of a salary commission for a citizen salary commission for elected officials, and asked Keith and I to look into that. So after a good amount of research, kind of created what could be the framework of an ordinance for this process, and thought it was, now that we have that framework in place, thought it was a good opportunity to have a discussion with the board. This is still the direction you want to go. What feedback do you have, so that we can then take those steps? One thing that I did learn pretty quickly is that the statute with regard to citizen salary commissions is pretty prescriptive, more so than most statutes that I deal with. So that's why I try to, in the draft, differentiate what is statutory and what is discretionary on the part of the board. There's, some discretionary administrative bits that the county can make their own, but much of kind of what you do and how you do it is statutory. So happy to answer any questions. Or
have we spoken to any other counties who use this process and gotten their input and feedback?
I have. I spoke to two of my counterparts, one in San Juan County and one in Whitman County. They have been using this process of a salary commission for some time. They seem to think that it works for them, and it's taken a little bit of staff time. He said, I think both of them said their commissions meet twice a year, generally in the spring, like April and May, and then again in the fall as they're setting their budget. But they have found the process useful and seems to be working okay for them.
And they don't have any problem with the public participating in it?
No. They, as Carly just pointed out, some of this is statutory. There's a requirement for people to be on the commission that have certain expertise and background. It's not just completely like a volunteer board or an advisory board. It actually requires some folks with some skills to participate, but also there are at-large members from the public that participate, but they seem to think that it has met their expectations.
So one thing that was unclear to me is after the Salary Commission makes a determination, it is then put forth as a referendum on the next election?
No.
Or is that only under request?
That's only if someone wishes to challenge the determination of the commission.
Okay.
The commission files the salaries with the auditor's office, and then they're implemented. And then there's 30 days to initiate that referendum.
They're
process.
implemented immediately, or are they implemented at the next election cycle?
So an increase can be implemented immediately.
Okay.
A decrease has to wait for the next election cycle.
Okay.
That's only other electeds, not the commissioners.
No, it would include the commissioners as well.
On their re-election period.
Yeah.
Well, no, the Citizens Commission on Salaries can increase a commissioner's salary mid. The reason you can't do it now is because
Right.
you're determining your
Okay,
own salaries.
Wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
The
That-
distinction is that the board's not making the increase, so there's no potential for a self-serving change.
Got it.
Correct.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction to point out that the results of the salary commission do not come before the Board of Commissioners for
Vetted.
approval.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it.
And there's some ways administratively that some different counties have approached that in terms of setting some guidelines or requirements to, because obviously there's a budget impact when salaries are changed, and so I've seen some counties address that by saying, January 1 salaries need to be filed by September, so they can be integrated into the budget, or something similar. So the board does have discretion to set some time frames for the commission to file salary changes.
That would
and
make
things.
sense too, instead of setting your budget the 1st of December and then 1st of February, everything changes, that.
Yeah, I think that's something that could make a lot of sense, for the county to minimize some potential budget impacts.
Yeah.
But no other counties close by, Grant, Benton, nobody else has a commission?
Whitman does. I think they're
Yeah,
the
Whitman
closest one.
They're the closest.
Yes. Kittitas has one as well.
Okay.
Those would probably be the closest.
You have all the counties listed that do have them?
I don't have all of them. I know of Snohomish, Whatcom, Pierce, San Juan, Lewis, Whitman, Thurston, Kittitas, and Spokane. There's no list somewhere that says where, so kind of through the process of researching, trying to find some big ones and some small ones and, be able to kind of look at what they're doing.
So Pierce has one also.
They do.
Sounds like it's 25% to maybe a third of the counties, out of the 39 counties.
Probably. I said, I haven't surveyed all of them, but
I've talked to some people at Wasatch too, and I think that's in the ballpark. The public involvement certainly is clear in the selection of members of the commission. Maybe you could just, for the benefit of people listening, kind of walk through what that process looks like from start to end.
so it's a 10-member commission. 6 of the members are chosen by lottery of the registered voters in the county, 2 from each commissioner district. So the statute requires that the auditor's office publish procedures for how they're going to run that lottery, and then they make those selections, send notification to those citizens, and then keep going until they get those 6 positions filled. The remaining 4 positions are appointed, and they come from, they're required to have experience in the field of personnel management, and they're to come from 4 different sectors. So one is a business professional, 1 professional personnel management, probably HR, 1 from the legal profession, and then 1 from organized labor, but all citizens of Franklin County. So there's a balance there of professional positions and then the lottery positions.
And how are those 4 selected and or approved?
Those would be appointed by the Board of Commissioners. Right. So we would run an application process.
Right.
And
I recognize all that's in here. It's a great read ahead. It's just I'm always mindful that there's a lot of people interested who are listening and
of course
trying to fill in the blanks for them.
Absolutely. And those qualifications are, again, all prescribed by the statute.
Right.
Yeah.
And each member can only serve for 8 years,
Well, they can only serve for 2 terms.
of 4 years.
This board in the ordinance would set the term length. I put 4 years in the draft, but I've seen anywhere from 2, 3. That would be within the purview of the board. I would definitely recommend staggering the initial terms so that you have continuity, just like we generally do with other boards and commissions, to keep that continuity so you don't have everyone coming up brand new at the same time. But yes, and that's one of the reasons why I recommend that we, number and assign the positions so we can keep track of, which positions are open, since there is a coordination between the commissioner's office and the auditor's office. It's a little more detailed than some of our other boards and commissions.
Sure. I realize this is a discussion today and not an action memorandum, which is good. I appreciate that because there's time to consider this. I would really be interested in hearing from the other electeds today or in the near future as to what their thoughts are too, since this impacts them equally.
Sure.
Do you want to talk to them?
Well, today or in the near future. I wasn't trying to bait you, Sheriff, but I thought you might want to have an opinion or share an opinion.
From a sheriff's standpoint, and my profession, I wouldn't be objectionable to it. I think it would be advantageous, to be quite honest. If you get a bunch of professionals sitting down, I would suspect that I'd be making more money than I'm making now. Currently, with Olympia in session, we're working on some different things to firm up the office of sheriff, such as certification requirements and those type of things, to try to professionalize the office of sheriff. And it's going to be followed by another House bill at some point that says sheriffs make a certain percentage of Superior Court judges and those type of things.
Sure.
And I believe this process would probably stave off that occurring if sheriffs across the state realize that, well, no, the people that voted you into that office are the ones setting your wages. They would probably change that dynamic to a certain degree. If it goes south, I just retire.
Yeah.
Go find something else to do.
Well, it's kind of a sensitive point, but I'm glad you raised it, which is the majority of the people that would be on this commission would not necessarily have to have any expertise of any kind. And while I have great faith in the people of Franklin County, you don't know what people bring to the equation. And I could see that coloring the decisions, and I could also see it affecting the attractiveness and the number of people who would actually sign up to serve as sheriff or to serve in other positions.
Well, it will. Yeah, I mean, there's a tipping point,
Right.
Right. Where you go, well, this is not financially viable. So it could stop. It could stop if it went that way. But so far, from what I hear, I think Mason County just went through it. I believe Grant County actually does it.
Do they?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I heard the sheriff.
Might be
say
more
they
than we
did it.
think, huh? More
Yeah,
counties
it
are-
might be more than you think. I mean,
Yeah.
I could be off. I just know in Mason County, for example, the sheriff went from, I want to say it's $79,000 to he now makes the appropriate amount of money in about the 140 range. And some of his wages, quite honestly, was politics. There was commissioners that didn't get along with him, and he didn't get along with commissioners, so they played with his wages. So it stops a lot of that. But,
Well, I've made the comment in board meetings in the past that if the citizens of the county wanted to reduce the commissioner's salaries to the state minimum, which is about $40,000 a year, they could do that. And the result was you'd have very few people with the requisite experience to do the job well signing up for it. And on the other end of the scale, we certainly don't want to overpay people. It's the public's money.
That's right.
And I think getting the board out of the process of making those potentially sensitive and sometimes political decisions is not a bad thing.
I don't disagree with you.
And like you, I suspect that, and this is one of the things that I think might get overlooked, is that there's a potential budget impact. I think some salaries would actually go up. I don't know that, but I look around the county or the state and some of the other counties meeting at Wasac, and the compensation numbers are just all over the map.
Right. Yeah. I to be honest with you, I have not heard anything negative about this process from the other counties. Since most of them are agreeable with what the citizens' decisions are.
Well, like you say, it takes the politics out of it.
Yes.
It does. It does. Yeah. Exactly. It takes the politics out of it, and then if they're setting those wages, then people have to decide if they're going to run for those positions based on those wages, et cetera.
Right. Absolutely.
And then you'll see the fallout. You know,
Right.
It's probably a poor choice of words, but you'll see what caliber are the people that are stepping up to run for those offices.
Yeah. Well, there are a number of people who have left much higher compensating positions to come do this important work, and you see that in a lot of different counties. I see you raising your hand. Since you did, I will too, but that's not really the point. The point is that we want people here who have the requisite skill sets and the experience, and getting professionals out of the private market to come do these jobs requires at least adequate compensation. I think a salary commission probably do that as well as we can.
Yep. Like I say, I suspect if it was all in place, you would see a rise. Now, how high that rise, I don't know. I don't think you'd see it go backward.
Well, and that's kind of what I touched on, was that if the salary commission's recommendations go into effect and they don't come here for approval, there's a potential budget impact and an increase of cost to the citizens, where this board, which is the executive body and responsible for the finances of the county, doesn't have a say. That's the only thing I've heard in this that concerns me, and that's on the premise that we think that there's a potential for salaries to go up. I don't know if that's really the case, or if it is, how much it would be. It just, because we're responsible for the county's purse, it makes me nervous to hand over that authority to some other body.
But
it's only for the elected.
In all of yours defense, at least the 5 years I've been here, I haven't seen you all pushing backwards. I've seen you all trying to narrow that gap. And that narrowing of that gap it's not too far off. It depends on what position you're in at the time. But that narrowing has, over the past 5 years, at least my experience, has gotten smaller versus wider.
Right.
So
Right.
that's in a sense of fairness to the commission.
And if I might add, we're talking about 10 positions that this commission will have jurisdiction over, and it's going to take 6 out of the 10 to vote yes.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
I think it's a wanted, and I think it's a warranted commission that should be in
Viable
place.
option, in my opinion.
I'm sorry?
It's a viable option in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Curtis.
I agree with what's been said so far. I don't think it would be a problem. I think just educating the board as to what we're doing, why we're doing it. I fear that too, that if you lower it, you're going to get unqualified people coming in. A lot of people don't know exactly what the coroner does. I carry my phone 24/7, 365 days a year. I have that thing with me. Some people don't realize that. So I think it's taking education on our part, which isn't bad. We need to justify why we're doing what we're doing, why we're being compensated like we're being compensated. Like the sheriff right now, I know we've got legislation going on over there now that's going to make the office step up in what we have to do for training and to be certified. They're going to make us be certified in the office now too. So those budgets are going to be affected. That's going to affect our budget. So I have no opposition to a commission. Like I said, it takes the politics out of it. I don't know if there was any way. Our concern is the budget going to skyrocket because of that? I don't know if there's any way that a cap can be put on salaries, so the commission or that board could only raise it so much. if that's something we could look at too, because that would be a concern of mine too. 'Cause
Well, and
I
I want
pay
to clarify,
taxes,
I don't have concerns about it skyrocketing. I'm thinking strategically, long term. You know, there's pressure upward or downward on salaries. It has the potential for a budget impact, but I don't want to overstate that. I don't think it's going to, corrupt our budget or put us in the poorhouse. It's just another consideration.
yeah, I think if the public's out there, they know, okay, our colleagues are in there looking out for us. I think that's a good idea too. So, thank you.
One thing too, in my research, I read minutes and listened to some salary commission meetings from different counties, and one of the opportunities that this public meeting process allows for is for elected officials to educate that commission on what they do, and I was able to listen to different presentations from different elected offices, and so it's I think a nice opportunity for the public to be educated on what these elected officials do in their offices and what kind of requirements that they have placed upon them.
Yeah, you hear all the time, we go someplace and ask you what you do. I say, well, I'm a county commissioner. Well, what's that?
All right.
All right, we'll carry on with this discussion. I'm sure that.
Was there anything in the draft that, from the highlighted sections that are within the board's discretion, that anybody had concerns with, or are we moving in the right direction?
I liked everything I read.
So we're presuming that the preference of the board then is to put this into final form for, or do you?
I would want to come talk to you about staggering on some of these positions too. It looks like, if I'm reading it right, while they're staggered, there's potential for half of them to turn over at the same time. And that's, anytime you have a deliberative body and you change out 50% of the body, it's probably tolerable, but it's not really ideal. Typically, you'll see those broken into maybe thirds. Like
I could do that.
When they redistrict the city of Pasco into independent voting districts, you'll see that they had some very short terms, like a year, and some that were 2 and 3 and 4, and really broke it up so that you weren't having big turnovers. I think in part because the learning curve can be fairly steep. So that's one thing I would suggest, is maybe we just break that up a little bit more.
Okay.
Other than that, I didn't really see anything that I thought was in need of a tweak.
When you say organized labor, are we talking about a union representative?
Yes.
Okay.
Someone who works in that field.
And legal would be a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Professional personal management.
Probably HR.
An HR person outside of the courthouse. Okay.
Right. It's important to note that employees of the county and their relatives are prohibited from serving on the commission.
And of course, business could be anything from a farmer to
Right.
a business in town.
Mm-hmm. Yep, anywhere where there's personnel management experience in there.
I like it.
Is the board interested in setting some timelines for the commission around setting salaries to allow, as we discussed, some budgetary alignment?
Are you saying the timeline for initial establishment or meeting schedule, or both?
Well, so for example, Whitman County, when they created theirs, they required that the commission, as soon as possible after their formation, set salaries, and then in subsequent years by July for the following year. So is there any interest in?
Well, I would also suggest July or August area so that you can gear up for the next budget.
But if there's an increase in salary, it's immediate, and that's going to affect that budget for that year. Correct?
Well, it doesn't, I mean, it doesn't have to be immediate. The salary commission could say effective January 1.
That's what I would suggest, that an increase would come the following January, so you don't disrupt the budget.
Well, I think they have to know what the budget is when they're working on the compensation, so.
Yeah, it's a chicken egg kind of thing.
A little
Do you
bit,
write it
yeah.
for the budget, or do you write it to comply with the budget, or do you write it to drive the budget? So I think it can really happen anytime. What's unique about it is that wherein the board has in the past set its own salaries, that needed to be done before term started, and then it was locked in for the whole term. That's one of the downsides of the current system, is that you can go 4 years without any consideration of salary, and markets can go up and they can go down over 4 years, a pretty big time span. So that's one of the pluses, but the point would be that we've got a term starting again, an election this year. And if it were the board setting the salary for the next term, we would want to take that action early in the year so people have plenty of time to know what the salary is going to be and to determine whether or not they want to file and run for office. In this case, that doesn't apply. The salaries could remain status quo. The board wouldn't need to change them or take any action. And the salary commission could be formed. It could meet midsummer. And then because you can make changes during that 4-year cycle, the fact that we're not setting a new salary for the upcoming term is not an issue, because you'll have a commission to look at it sooner than the next 4-year cycle, if all that makes sense. So to me, that would be, assuming we decide to go forward with this, I suspect we will. It sounds like there's quite a lot of support, a few little tweaks in the ordinance, but I would think that we would approve it sometime early in this year, look to have it formed in the spring, have them meet in the summer, and then work off of their recommendations.
Okay.
And we will have a public comment on this at some point down the road, right? When we have it finalized, that we can have the public come in and comment on it before we vote it in?
Certainly.
Yep.
Yeah. I think we need to have them weigh in on it, whether they want it or not. It's just a suggestion on our part. Okay.
So, Carly, I'm not certainly opposed to public input. In fact, I think I can't really think of a circumstance where it wouldn't be valuable, except maybe a closed record quasi-judicial hearing. But having said that, there's no requirement for public approval or participation in the process of creating this. This is really a board action.
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
Again, I'm not opposed to it. I just wanted to understand the rules.
Thanks for your work, Carly.
Yes, thank you.
Keith, this brings us down to redistricting plans.
Yes, Commissioners, I'd like to, before we have an open discussion, due to potential litigation, I would like to request a 20-minute executive session with the board and legal counsel to discuss matters related to potential litigation under RCW 42.30.110, paragraph 1, subparagraph I.
20 minutes, you said.
Yeah, I think that will be adequate.
Okay.
We may have to extend, but I think that would work.
Here we go. We have finished our first 20-minute executive session. We found that we need to go back in for 10 minutes additional under the same RCW. And we are out of executive session with no decisions made, and We'll carry on at this point to our first of two public comment periods. Public comments? I did. Just discussed redistricting.
Executive session? Why?
Because of the possibility of the Latino vote being, there's other counties being sued.
Jen, maybe you could speak to that for us so that we don't violate the law on executive session. The question was, what did we discuss in executive session?
And we can't share that publicly. It is a violation of the RCW on executive sessions. However, I do think we skipped, were we going to have an open discussion then?
I thought we were, but
I think we skipped over that, so maybe that would help if we had that public discussion, or the open discussion, I guess, on the redistricting.
Okay.
So based on that the possibility you could be sued, you guys just as well as do everything in executive session, right? Because you could be sued about anything at any time for any reason, correct? I don't mean it as a joke.
Yeah. There's some things we can go in executive and some number.
I recognize that, but that's pretty vague to just say, well, we might get sued.
so the intent of executive session is to let the board discuss things in the case of a litigation or potential litigation where having an open public discussion might aid the efforts of those who might sue the citizens of Franklin County, because when they sue the county, that's who they're suing. And it's our job to try and have some of those preliminary discussions in executive session to make sure that we understand what the legal risks are of potential action. All the actions still have to be taken in public. The public still has an opportunity to weigh in on those. It's just that it's like if you're doing a business deal, some of those things are privileged and confidential for a reason. You don't want your adversaries to know those details. That's what we're limited to discussing in executive session. The discussion of redistricting and where the boundaries would be and the numbers and the why is all still a public discussion matter.
So there is anticipation that
Yes.
there is somebody adversarially looking
Yes.
at
Yes.
this.
Other counties are currently being sued on this specific issue.
Okay.
Any further, Keith?
Yeah, look, am I on here? It is important that we do have some public discussion about redistricting. We have made a very concerted effort to evaluate the numbers from the the State Office of Financial Management, knowing that those numbers were generated back in April of last year. A lot has changed, particularly in Pasco, as you look at the development that's gone on in this area along the I-82 corridor, 182 corridor, and as we've heard in prior meetings, the number of new houses that are going to continue to be placed in northwest Pasco. So in order to try to meet the needs of the Voting Rights Act, right now we have three commissioner districts all sharing this corner between 182 and 20th Avenue. And so my recommendation to the board has been to move all of the precincts that are to the east of 20th Avenue into District 2 that reaches around the east side of the county and goes north up clear past Connell. And that would take District 3 completely out of this area south of 182. Our preference would have been based on areas of interest within the city, to move that boundary all the way over to 395 rather than 20th. But the numbers that in population in these areas that run along 395 and between 395 and 20th are dense enough that it would really push District 3 back up into the other side of Connell, and we didn't want to split the North County quite that much. When we get new census data in a couple of years, our estimate is probably going to be that District 1 will continue to move westward, probably all the way to 395 at that point in time. But the numbers probably aren't there right now to necessarily justify that. The other option, which we've considered but have not recommended, would be push District 1 further into this area, maybe up to Burden Boulevard. What we're proposing right now actually is moving District 1 up into 58 and 73 on the river shore, because we think that these communities along the river shore have more in common with these other river shore developments that are already in District 1. As has been pointed out, the public has a right to weigh in on this. We have right now a proposal that I think balances fairly with current knowledge of these houses that have been built in 47 and that are being built in 46, 51, and 39. So we're not relying exclusively on the year-old Office of Financial Management data, but recognizing that we've got a lot of construction going on in those particular areas and are going to continue to see building in 68 and 58 in this area of 51. It's a proposal. It's not hard and fast. We certainly want the board's recommendations if you're ready to.
Keith, could you give the numbers of that proposal of moving over to 20th, the number count of District 2, District 1, and District 3 with what you have drawn up? If you use just the Office of Financial Management numbers, District 1 would have 32,065 in population. District 2 would have 34,896, and District 3 would be 31,716. But if we account for what we know to be already built homes or already platted homes, I'm sorry, that's with the expectation of the platted homes. If we just use the Office of Financial Management numbers, District 1 comes down to just under 30,000, and District 3 also comes down to about 29,000. But it would leave District 2 at 34,896. So in anticipation of what we know to be growth and what's expected growth, they're within a margin of error of about 10%, which is kind of the threshold that we use for being equitable.
Okay, just a point of clarification.
Certainly.
The statute, as I recall it, isn't all that specific, but it does clearly say that they'd like you to follow recognized geographic, and I don't think he used the term geopolitical boundaries, but that's what it means, where you try to avoid splitting up areas of communities that have common interests, common nationalities, ethnicities, socioeconomics, demographics, those kinds of things. And I think it's anticipated they don't want you to divvy those up so that you don't intentionally or inadvertently subvert or undermine the voting power of that block of people living in common circumstance with common heritage. And that was the concern with the east side of Pasco. It's not East Pasco. It is Pasco like the rest of us, but it's east of 395. It's clear that there's a very homogeneous community there. It's very consistent. And if that gets carved up into pieces, it could be misperceived in this case, that we're trying to undermine the voting power of that portion of our community. It's exactly the scenario the city of Pasco experienced, and the one for which they were successfully sued and forced into district-only voting. Now, there's some debate about whether or not counties can be forced into district-only voting. Currently, the city or the county of Yakima is being sued on this very issue, and I don't know, but I suspect it may well go to the Washington State Supreme Court to decide whether or not counties can be pushed into district-only voting. With respect to what we're trying to do here, using boundaries like Interstate 395 from the Blue Bridge going north, Interstate 182 or Burden Boulevard or Sandifer, recognized boundaries helps our case. Moving the boundary, if you go back to the previous map, from 20th Avenue westward over to 395, moving that from 20th over to 395 further reduces the dissection of that eastern end of Pasco, and 395 is a recognizable boundary. I realize that we may not be able to do everything in one redistricting cycle to get the east side of Pasco into a homogeneous block, but historically it's been carved up into pieces to make the other districts balance. And I think that's exactly the kind of behavior that the Voting Rights Act pushes back against that was passed last year. So it's those combinations of factors that I think potentially put the county at risk for legal or other action, and that's why I've been advocating for trying to shore up some of these boundaries. With respect to District 1, which under the proposal would start on the east end at 20th Avenue and run all the way out past Road 100, past Interstate 182, past the undeveloped land there in District 58, and potentially all the way up into 73, I would suggest that keeping that boundary along the shore further south, maybe no farther north than Precinct 58 there, and adding to District 1 urbanized areas around the Hapo Center, which is, I think, 39, keeping a more compact urban district is more consistent with the Voting Rights Act and the RCWs. Where exactly those lines get drawn can be difficult because of the need to balance the population in those districts. We have a unique opportunity with a seat that has publicly been announced will be an open seat starting January of next year. The possibility to adjust the boundary between Districts 2 and 3 in the north end of the county exists where historically it has not existed. In District 3, which is the western part of the county in the north, could move to the east. It could incorporate Connell. It could move over to 395, which is a recognized boundary. So it's simple math to add and subtract precincts. And where we are giving ourselves some latitude for growth in areas, I think we have the flexibility to do that. All that said, I think that all speaks to intent and the challenge. If the majority of the board decide that they want to keep it at 20th Avenue as opposed to District 1 at 20th Avenue as opposed to bringing it over to 395, certainly I'll respect the majority will of the board, but I don't think it does everything that we can do to respect the homogeneous nature of the east side of Pasco as a voting block, that we don't want to undermine their vote by dissecting that homogeneous community. It just happens that 1 is probably the most flexible because we've got a lot of growth coming in at the Road 68 and 182 intersection on the southwest in what is Precinct 47. And it's easy to move it north across the interstate into the Hapo Center area. So constraining District 1 and not pushing it into the east end of Pasco and cutting into a majority-minority area population and not running it further northwest along the shoreline and cutting into more rural areas, all of those things speak to compliance with the statute. I think the only one that is likely to get us in any difficulty is if we don't make a concerted effort to keep like communities in a common boundary area and not carve them up. And if we've got the opportunity and now it's public that we have considered this option, it becomes more important to do everything we can to keep East Pasco as a block. And the evidence of that is the lawsuit that the city of Pasco lost on this very issue.
So are
Sure.
we at public comment or are we just? What were the directives or guidance from the lawsuits that was driving redistricting? I think if I recall, there was like 4 points. Population?
The The legislation, if I may, requires several things. It says, 1, districts shall be nearly as equal in population as possible to the other districts. Each district shall be as compact as possible. Each district shall consist of geographically contiguous areas. Population data may not be used for purposes of favoring or disfavoring any racial group or political party. To the extent feasible, and if not inconsistent with the basic enabling legislation, the district boundary shall coincide with existing recognized natural boundaries and shall, to the extent possible, preserve existing communities of related and mutual interest. So these things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, or you can't satisfy 100% of any one of these items. They're to be considered in.
All right. Just points of consideration.
Yeah.
One is you might consider lining out boundaries from east to west, from north to south versus east to west. I think that if you look at the growth of Pasco itself, there isn't a defined ethnicity in any of the areas anymore. I think if you just ran a surname of ownership of property in this city and county, you would find that it's probably more equally divided than one would suspect. I don't know how I don't believe we can pigeonhole, if you will, probably the wrong word, a group of people into the east side, because that no longer exists anymore. Everybody's pretty diverse and out there, and some sort of formulation of just a surname run would probably provide you with information on how you do that and how you divide that. Pasco and Franklin County is very diverse anymore. It's no longer for example, when I started work at 21 years old, working in Pasco on the east side, it was predominantly black. Then you watch this migration of Hispanics and Hispanic families coming in, and today it's just the polar opposite. But you also have areas of growth in East Pasco that you have $300,000 houses being built on East A Street in this whole expanding neighborhood, and you just got to walk through it, and it's diverse. I can point out all kinds of different colors and ethnicities in those neighborhoods as I can out here on the riverbank in far west Pasco with some of these big developments. In fact, I got friends living in those houses that grew up on the east side, but they're living out there now as third generation Hispanics, for lack of better words. So just something to consider. I'm not pointing any fingers or anything, but I think that you would find that we haven't grouped a class of people in one area as much as some people want to make it to be.
Well, to be clear, that wasn't the assertion I was making.
I'm not saying
it speaks to compactness, right, socioeconomics, which isn't ethnic or racial, contiguous, and so. But absolutely get your point, and couldn't agree more. We're a diverse county, more than probably we've been in our history, and that's a good thing. But part of this is also perception on the part of the outside agencies that are bringing suit against counties, and we are very much in the crosshairs of those efforts. And so anything we can do that makes our districts follow established boundaries, more compact, and, oh, by the way,
except
makes
for that,
homogenous
in reality, that is the driving factor. That fourth point that we're calling all kinds of different names. And the reality of that is
what's
as
that?
far as people's ethnic background. That's one of the points that has to have equal consideration with everything else.
Yeah, it's communities of common interest is where I would put it, and I think that crosses a lot more than ethnicity. It gets into socioeconomics and living standards and communities, and yeah. Well, I mean, clearly, if you're living. And my point is to that, sir, is the socioeconomics of the east side has changed greatly. Right. No, I don't disagree.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks for the input.
So, Matt Deaton, is there some maps were put up last week, and there was some discussion, and this is a furtherance to that. I'm just thinking as auditor, goodness, who's tall? I've never felt this short before. I was wondering, this is largely in line with what was discussed last time, or is there a little bit of a change, or?
Very marginal change from last time.
And then
I do have a map. I don't have it up on I don't have an electronic version of it. I'm happy to share it with whoever would like to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I just would like to see what's there. And is there more than one consideration that they'll vote on, or
We're not ready for a vote. That's the purpose of having the discussion, is to try to get closer to a map that commissioners agree on can be adopted, and of course,
well, yeah, I thought we did that last week, but okay. I guess the one thing I would caution, I was heavily involved with in the meetings with the process the city went through, ended up district only. And one of the things I would say to the board is I wouldn't provide a solution that's, seeking a problem. In other words, Franklin County's, we have a hybrid system. I mean, I did quite a bit of preparation, sat in with those meetings with the ACLU, and in fact, Mr. Sant was in one of them as well. And, I would say quite all too often, sometimes government, makes moves that tries to head off things that really don't exist. So, I guess I would keep that in mind when we're making wholesale changes. So, thank you.
So I just note that we've spoken to what the criteria are in the law, and I think everything I've proposed and all the comments I've made have been focused on those criteria. If it so happens that following the criteria in the law also reduces the chances of litigation, then that's all to the good of the county.
Okay. Any further discussion?
In order to get us to kind of move the ball down the field here, is the direction of the board to maybe relook at that eastern boundary and this precinct 73, leave that in District 3, and perhaps move, I think it's 39, 39 into District 1 to balance the numbers.
So we're not just use that quickly to illustrate. By putting 39 into District 1, you keep it more compact. Would I like to have that beautiful area along the river shore up toward Dent Road and Kohler in my district? Sure. Great property, great people, wonderful area. But it takes my district and it elongates it. And it does exactly the opposite of what the law asks you to do, which is to try and keep them compact. I'm happy to have either one in my district. But if I'm going to follow the law, which is I try to do, keeping it more compact makes more sense. But it's not a matter that's going to be a make or break for me. I just think that we know the criteria in the law. Let's try to follow them.
Yeah, I concur on a couple of those points, one of which is 182, while it is a very natural boundary, over time it's going to become less so, because there's really not, other than the donut holes, there's not a lot of growth that's going to happen comparative to what's going to happen north of the freeway.
The boundary is going to have to become Burden and Sandiford.
Yeah.
Few people realize that if you start the north end of the county and you come south until you have 1/3 of the population in Franklin County, you have to come south the riverside of Burden Boulevard. That's a straight line across the county. So it's inevitable that it's going to be down into the urban areas.
I don't sense from the board that there is an appetite to do a wholesale reworking of the districts, but to try to make these numbers along these general principles work for now until we have hard data from the census in a couple of years.
I think 20th Avenue is a good, distinct boundary, if we can make that work. And the river is a distinct boundary. How we carve up the rest depends on numbers. And like it's been stated, I believe my daughter, who's married to Eladio Castillo, lives in 46. And I visit a lot of their neighbors, and it's diverse. And you go north, it's diverse. I mean, we are a melting pot of our society in Franklin County. I don't care which way you go, we're diverse. So I don't think that's a factor, and we shouldn't let a threat of a lawsuit completely upend the way the county's been drawn up for the history of the county. And it's been drawn up this direction for a reason. And I think that we need to try to keep our historical guidelines as much as possible intact.
And I would offer that ethnicity is not the driver, neither is potential litigation. The driver is compliance with the law. And the law, we've already talked to what those criteria are. For folks who are listening who are particularly interested in this subject, I would encourage you to Google the current pending lawsuit against the city, Yakima County on this issue. It's enlightening and gives some insight into how counties are now, I don't want to say the target, but maybe that's true, the target of the same actions that cities have experienced in recent years. And we have an opportunity to make sure that we're in compliance with the law as best we can. Whether that's to fend off a lawsuit or to comply with the law, take your pick. I'm satisfied that it complies with the law. That's my driver.
Okay. Any other discussion at this point? Okay. Thank you, Keith. That does bring us to our public comment period of the agenda. Anybody?
Good morning, Commissioners. Stephen Bauman, developer here in the Tri-Cities in Franklin County. Stand before you again as I did last week with the concern of a subdivision that I'm trying to develop off of Road 68. It's in the donut hole. And stood before City Council last night, brought to them my concern. I asked them, like I asked you last week, that your board and the city's board get together and try to work out some type of development agreement in that. The city didn't seem to have any interest in entertaining that whatsoever, as far as I could tell. Mr. Didier, you were there.
Yep.
You heard what I said and what their response was. They feel that with my need for water, that they have jurisdiction to ask for anything that they wish, whether it's road standards, light poles, fences,
impact
locations,
fees.
Design, impact fees, everything. They feel that and so I'm not sure what I'm here to ask for, other than to want you to know what's going on, what they feel their jurisdiction is, what they feel they can do, where they feel they can reach, and what they feel that they have a right to ask for. And I don't think it's reasonable. I'm caught in between, and I'm not really sure what to do. So asking for advice, I guess, more than anything on what do I do? I have to make headway. It appears that I'm impotent in my ability to develop a small 16-lot subdivision. I've developed some very large subdivisions successfully, and but this one I seem to be stuck in between, where that there's multi-jurisdictions, and so I guess I'm looking for advice. What do I do? How do I make headway? 14 months in, and I'm stuck.
So I think there's two things. One, I think the board ought to ask the county administrator, who is the county equivalent to the city manager, to contact city manager and ask for a meeting of key staff with the objective of working out a mutual agreement on development standards between the unincorporated and incorporated areas.
I believe that
Set a
happened.
timeline on that, and then follow it up to make sure that it actually happens. I've made this suggestion in the past. Keith, maybe you could give us an update on where that process stands.
Yeah, we have met with the city, and they have maintained their position that access to water is contingent upon meeting city development standards. We are meeting with them, our planning staff is meeting with their planning staff regularly now to work on joint development standards, but so far the city has not been willing to relinquish control of water for these developments in these unincorporated parts of the county within UGA.
Have we done a legal review to assure ourselves that everybody is operating consistent with the law?
That probably needs to be done next. I think that's probably the logical next step. I think we've done a little bit of that research, but not enough to say for certain that the county's position definitively is different from the city's. So I think we need to answer that question.
It would
This
seem
is just a comment, public comment period. So,
Just looking for advice, trying to figure out where to go. 14 months is reasonable enough time to have made a headway, and I'm not making headway. City wants me to round file everything I've done to date and start over with a different design. And with the new design, I lose lots, multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars at stake, and I'm parked and can't move forward. The county's one of the county's goals, I believe, and directions is they would like to see the donut holes developed further and some of the density that the city wants to move the urban growth area. You know, everybody, city and county, I believe, would like to increase density in the donut holes, and I'm attempting to do that unsuccessfully. So that's where I'd like some help and to figure out how we can make some headway.
If I may ask you, how many other builders do you believe are in the same predicament you're in?
Multiple. I've had multiple other developers. I'm a little bit more bold than some of them, but they've asked me, what do we do? He said, what do I do? Buys a piece of ground. They believe that they know. They call. They've met with staff. They believe they know the standards. And then this subdivision alone is $115,000 approximately of impact fees that doing my due diligence, I come in and I say, what do I need to do? And the county says, this is what you need to do. And that's an unknown that you don't know until you have it and you're in the process. And they say, oh, by the way, we need $115,000 in impact fees. And now the city wanting to do other things. An example of something is when I build a subdivision in the city with city standards, I build light poles, that type of stuff. The city has a mechanism to pay for that. You don't put it doesn't have a meter base where it spins the meter. They pay a lump sum per pole to the jurisdiction, whether it's Franklin PUD or Big Bend Electric or whatever it is. I don't believe the county has that mechanism to do those things. So when the city requires that I put light poles in, yet it's in the county, there's just things that don't line up and don't work together, and they keep reaching in further and further, making more and more demands, and I just don't know what to do. Thank you.
further public comment? Move on to pay the bills, Commissioner.
Got one fiscal note today. It's fund expenditures. Move for approval as presented. Total amount $339,013.84. Note that it's been reviewed and signed by the county administrator and 2 representatives of the auditor's office.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That brings us down to the consent agenda. What have we got this morning? 1 through 10.
Chairman, not hearing anyone requesting to pull any items for separate consideration, I'll go ahead and move for approval of consent agenda as presented with 10 items.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So, okay. Brings us down to Keith again.
No action needed. I just wanted to remind you that the NACO conference is coming up at the end of February, first week of March. I plan on attending that. I'll be out there Sunday the 29th of February through the 4th of March.
So Keith, with being the administrator office business, I would suggest that the planners also go with you to this meeting with Pasco.
They have been, yes.
And their planners show up. And if you need a commissioner, I will volunteer my time.
It's welcome, it's invited, but it's problematic to have a commissioner sometimes at that level. But
we got to get this worked out.
Yeah, I would encourage you to have conversations with your counterparts at the city council.
I have been. I was there last night, and I didn't like the forcibility of the city of Pasco that are throwing on our jurisdiction.
Well, Keith, this is not a new issue.
Yeah.
It's been going on for a number of years. We've raised our concerns to the city a number of times. Constituents have brought it to the city council. We've met with their staff. I think the county has operated in good faith, and I suspect the city has too. It just appears that we have a difference of opinion as to what authorities exist in each jurisdiction. To me, that says that we probably need to, given the gravity of it and the fiscal impact on developers in our county, we need to find out what the legal answer is. There have been challenges to the city's use of proxies in return for giving water service, and they use that proxy vote in annexation actions. I think that's probably still being tested in the courts, but the relevance of that and the point is that when there's an inability to develop group water systems off of wells, it strands development in those donut holes, and one of the primary objectives under the Growth Management Act is to in fact fill in those donut holes in those undeveloped areas before we move the urban growth boundary out. And so there is an implication and a threat to the county's obligations by not getting this worked out. So for all those reasons, we probably ought to get a legal opinion as to whose interpretation is correct here. It'd be, I think, an appropriate courtesy to run that by the city first and ask them if they've got any heartburn with that. My guess is they might welcome it as well. But I think we're at that point of just finding out what the rules are, what's the law allow and not allow. I don't know any developers that are interested in knowingly violating the law, but they do have a right to know what the rules are.
Anything else, Keith?
No.
Okay. One more item on the agenda for public comment. Seeing none, we need another executive session for any reason.
I believe so.
Okay. Commissioners, have anything for the board today?
We'll be back in Olympia later this week, working various bills. I think I have a good sense of the ones that the board is concerned about, and if there's any new ones that have come up, please let Mr. Johnson know, and he can share that with me before I go.
Okay. There's nothing else. For the good of the board, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Are we supposed to all be doing that evaluation individually?
Supposed to be done last Friday.
Oh, I guess I didn't get mine done.
I think they kicked it out to the 5th.
So I got another day.
Yeah.
I'll try to get that knocked out.
Yeah, there was some information that Lisa wanted. I don't know where she came up last minute. She was supposed to have the thing done.